Welcome to Japanese Sleep Whispers, your sanctuary for peaceful nights and gentle dreams. Here, you will find calming bedtime stories inspired by the timeless beauty and traditions of Japan. Each story is read slowly in a soothing voice, accompanied by natural sounds such as flowing rivers and the tranquil rhythm of shishi-odoshi. Whether you seek relaxation, relief from stress, or help falling asleep, these tales invite you to drift away into a world of serenity. Imagine quiet temples, moonlit gardens, and the whispering bamboo forests as you listen. If you'd like these soothing stories to be part of your nightly routine, consider subscribing so they're always with you when you need them. Subscribe and let these stories be your nightly ritual of calm and rest. Thank you for being here. May you always find peace in every moment. Steam and silence at a mountain inn. Prologue. The steam of the mountains. The mountains slept under a delicate veil of mist. Dawn had not yet broken fully, and the world was caught between night's last sigh and the pale promise of morning. Pines and cedars stood motionless, their shadows stretching long and soft across the forest floor. Each needle glistened with dew, and droplets hung suspended like tiny lanterns, reflecting the faintest hint of light from the awakening sky. A narrow path wound its way down the mountainside, over stones smoothed by centuries of rain and footsteps. It led to a small inn, a humble building of weathered wood and darkened beams, nestled in a gentle valley where the river flowed quietly beneath a stone bridge. From the chimney rose a thin spiral of smoke, dissolving slowly into the mist, carrying the scent of burning wood and faint traces of herbs used for the morning tea. It was a scent that promised warmth, calm, and quiet reflection. The traveler first saw the inn through the mist. Their cloak was damp with the morning dew, their hair sticky with fog. Yet as they approached, the warmth of the building touched their skin before their eyes could fully register the sight. Steam rose from the baths, curling through open windows, weaving its way into the forest as though the inn itself breathed along with the mountains. Every sound was gentle. The brook murmured over its stones in a rhythm steady and ancient. A bird called somewhere above, its song wavering and delicate, almost a question rather than a statement. Even the wind, which usually pressed against the skin with brisk insistence, passed softly through the trees, as if careful not to disturb the sacred calm of the valley. The traveler paused on the path. The forest was alive, yet nothing moved too quickly. Moss clung to boulders like green velvet, and the faint glow of lichen illuminated the dark corners beneath the roots of old trees. Here and there, a fern stretched its fronds toward the rising sun, a subtle arc of life in the quiet morning. The air smelled of earth, of damp leaves, of water, and of the hot springs that rested just beyond the inn's threshold. Inside the inn, the world was alive in other ways. Steam rose from the baths, thick and curling like a living thing. Tatami mats were brushed clean, polished faintly by the passage of countless feet. A kettle hummed quietly on the hearth, and the smell of boiled water mingled with the subtle fragrance of pine wood and fresh linen. Sliding doors were opened with soft groans of wood on wood, revealing rooms where futons lay folded in preparation for the day. The low murmur of the inn's caretakers blended seamlessly with the natural chorus outside the stream, the birds, and the distant rustle of leaves. The traveler entered through the wooden doorway, feeling warmth envelop them immediately. The coolness of the mist outside receded like a memory, leaving only the gentle embrace of wood, steam, and quiet sound. They inhaled, noticing the subtle vibrations in the air, the low hum of water, the faint metallic clink of a teacup. The brush of tatami under careful footsteps. Each sound was small, yet it resonated, as if the inn itself was alive and aware of their presence. The baths were a pool of pale, mineral-rich water. Steam rose in delicate spirals, curling above the surface, forming transient shapes that seemed almost human before dissolving into the air. The traveler knelt by the edge, letting their fingers trace the warm water. It felt like touching memory itself, soft, fluid, endless. A leaf from a nearby branch drifted onto the surface, carried by the faintest current, and the water rippled gently around it, distorting the reflection of the ceiling above. Outside, the mist had begun to shift. The sun's rays filtered through the forest, catching droplets in the air, scattering them into fragments of pale gold. The river shimmered in streaks of light, and stones beneath its surface glimmered like buried jewels. Every ripple, every drop, every particle of mist seemed to pulse with time itself, slow and deliberate. The inn's windows, fogged by the warmth of the baths, reflected these fragments, multiplying them across the shoji screens. The walls breathed with the air, expanding slightly with each gentle breeze, carrying the scent of water, wood, and incense. A small bell, hung by the doorway, jingled faintly as a breeze passed through, its sound delicate, almost like a question whispered to the mountains themselves. The traveler rose and walked quietly to the veranda. The stones beneath their feet were cold but solid, mossy and reassuring. They looked out over the valley. The river curved in lazy loops beneath the trees. The mountains rose behind in layered shadows, and clouds drifted slowly across the peaks. Everything was still, yet alive. Everything was aware. In the far distance, a deer stepped lightly through the forest, pausing at a clearing bathed in faint sunlight. It lifted its head, nostrils quivering, ears attentive to the subtle movements of the air. A petal from a cherry tree, carried by the wind, drifted past its nose, and it lowered its head, touching it lightly before moving on. The traveler watched, noting how life and stillness coexisted perfectly, each movement deliberate, each pause meaningful. Time seemed to stretch. The sun climbed slowly, and the inn's wooden beams glimmered in its pale light. Steam continued to rise, curling around the eaves, around the trees, and around the traveler, wrapping them in a cocoon of warmth and quiet. Even the distant mountains, immense and unyielding, seemed softened by the morning haze, their edges blurring into the clouds. The innkeeper, an elderly woman with a gentle smile, stepped quietly onto the veranda. She carried a small tray with tea, the porcelain cups humming faintly as they were placed on the wooden surface. No words were spoken, but the gesture conveyed welcome, patience, and the quiet understanding that time here was measured not by hours or minutes, but by the rhythm of breath, of steam, of silence. The traveler accepted the cup, feeling warmth seep into their hands. They brought it to their lips and sipped, the taste of herbs and mineral-rich water mingling perfectly, grounding them in the moment. Outside, the mist swirled and danced in sunlight, petals drifted lazily downward, and the mountains remained, timeless and watchful. They leaned back, closing their eyes for a moment, letting the forest, the inn, and the warm air wrap around them. A single bird called from a distant branch. The river's song continued, steady, gentle, eternal. Steam curled above the baths like a living thing, carrying faint whispers of past travelers, of moments long ago, of stories waiting to be remembered. Here, in this valley, time did not hurry. The world moved slowly, softly, and deliberately. Every sound, every scent, every ripple of air carried meaning. And as the traveler sat quietly, enveloped in warmth, mist, and the scent of mountains, they felt a sense of peace deeper than any they had known. The inn, the forest, the mountains all exhaled together. And in the soft, delicate symphony of water, wind, and steam, the traveler let themselves become part of the rhythm. Here, there was no need for words, for haste, for fear. There was only the quiet, eternal song of the mountains, the inn, and the morning light. Chapter 1: The Inn at Dawn. The first light of dawn filtered through the mist, brushing the mountains with pale gold. It seeped into the valley, settling on the stone path that wound its way toward the inn. The air was still, carrying the scent of wet earth, pine, and the faint mineral tang of the hot springs. Even the leaves on the trees seemed to pause, shimmering in droplets of dew as though savoring the morning. Inside the inn, the world began its quiet stirring. Sliding doors groaned softly as they were opened to air out the rooms. Tatami mats exhaled under the touch of careful feet. A kettle on the hearth hissed and bubbled, filling the space with warmth and the scent of boiled water. Steam rose from the bath, thick and curling like smoke from a chimney, mingling with the faint aroma of pine and herbs. The innkeeper, a woman whose hair was silvered with age, moved with deliberate calm. Her hands were steady as she arranged cups and trays for the morning tea. She paused at each futon, smoothing the folds gently, ensuring that the softness beneath would welcome each guest with unspoken care. Her movements were quiet, almost ceremonial, yet entirely natural. The inn itself seemed to breathe along with her, wood and tatami pulsing softly under her touch. The traveler, still wrapped in a damp cloak from the mountain mist, stepped into the main room. They paused, allowing the warmth and the gentle bustle of the inn to settle over them like a blanket. The wooden floorboards creaked faintly under their weight, yet the sound was absorbed into the rhythm of the inn's waking. Steam swirled lazily from the baths, wrapping around the traveler, brushing their face and hair with the soft scent of mineral water. A faint bell jingled somewhere, announcing the start of another day, though no one seemed to notice it consciously. It was the sound of ritual and remembrance, of time moving gently yet steadily. Outside, a breeze stirred the pines, and droplets of dew fell, landing on the stones below with soft clinks that echoed faintly in the valley. The guest stepped closer to the bath. The water shimmered in the dim light, steam curling like ephemeral tendrils above the surface. A leaf floated upon it, carried in by the morning air, and the traveler reached out to touch it. The water rippled under their fingers, reflecting the wooden beams above in wavering, golden patterns. It was a simple act, yet it carried a weight of serenity, a reminder that even the smallest movement could resonate through the stillness. Outside, the inn's garden stirred. A stone lantern stood among moss and low shrubs, its surface damp with dew. The petals of a cherry tree, not yet fully in bloom, quivered at the touch of the breeze. A small bird landed on the edge of the stone basin, pecking delicately at the water. Every element, the stone, the bird, the tree, The water interacted as if part of a slow, intricate dance choreographed by the morning itself. The innkeeper brought out the tea tray. 2 cups, steaming gently, were placed on the veranda overlooking the valley. The traveler accepted one, feeling warmth seep through their fingers, their palms pressed to the smooth surface of the porcelain. The first sip carried the fragrance of herbs and soft minerals, mingling with the lingering scent of mist and pine. It was a taste that seemed to dissolve time, slowing the mind, centering the heart. A few other guests had begun to stir. A child rubbed sleep from their eyes, yawning as they stepped carefully onto the tatami. An elder rose slowly, holding the railing as they moved toward the bath, their movements deliberate and meditative. The sounds, the child's yawn, the elder's creak of joints, the soft rustle of kimono blended into the inn's morning symphony, a melody of quiet life. Outside, the mist began to thin. The sun's rays pierced the treetops, scattering light in delicate beams that danced across the moss-covered stones. The river, winding beneath the bridge near the inn, caught the light and sparkled as though filled with countless tiny stars. The mountains, veiled still by lingering clouds, leaned over the valley with immense calm, guardians of the timeless rhythm below. The traveler finished their tea and set the cup down gently, listening to the inn's subtle music, the hiss of the water, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind, the murmur of the forest. They moved to the bath, dipping their hands into the steaming water. The heat seeped into their skin, loosening tension, drawing out the chill of the mountain air. Steam swirled around them, clouding the view for a moment, until it dissolved and revealed the world anew, a softer, gentler, more intimate space. As the traveler settled into the bath, the mind began to wander. They noticed the way the sun struck the water, forming tiny arcs of gold on the surface. They observed the mist rising from the stones outside, drifting into the forest, curling around the pines and cedars. A dragonfly skimmed the edge of the pool, its wings catching light, shimmering like liquid crystal before it darted away into the woods. The innkeeper moved silently behind the screens, adjusting towels and ensuring the water flowed smoothly into the baths. Her presence was a quiet anchor, unnoticeable yet grounding, like the earth beneath the valley. Each movement carried care, respect, and an understanding that here, in this place, time was not measured by clocks, but by attention, the slow, deliberate attention given to every breath, every ripple, every wisp of steam. Beyond the inn, the valley was coming fully to life. Birdsong filled the air, delicate and erratic, weaving a melody that intertwined with the sound of water over stones. A gentle wind carried the faint scent of cherry blossoms, though most had not yet opened, and moss released its earthy perfume. Even the sun seemed hesitant, touching the valley softly, brushing light over surfaces without harshness, illuminating without intrusion. The traveler leaned back in the bath, letting the warmth embrace them fully. Eyes half closed, they watched the steam rise, watched the light play upon the water, and listened to the subtle symphony of the inn and the forest. A small leaf floated past their face, carried by the current of air, brushing their cheek. It was insignificant, and yet, in the quiet, it felt as if the leaf carried a message: rest, observe, exist in the rhythm of this place. Minutes passed, perhaps hours, yet time was indistinct. The world had contracted to the inn, the bath, the mist, the warmth, and the gentle breathing of the mountains. The valley exhaled in harmony, the stones absorbed sound, the trees held the light, and the traveler became a part of the morning's pulse. When the bath was finally left, the traveler stepped out slowly, steam rising around them like a cloak of cloud. They toweled themselves carefully, every movement measured, every breath synchronized with the rhythm of the inn. Sliding doors were opened to allow the mist to mingle with the indoor air, creating a blend of warmth and coolness that was neither intrusive nor abrupt, but perfectly balanced. The innkeeper offered a gentle smile, and the traveler responded with a nod, an acknowledgement of the quiet understanding between them. No words were needed, the shared rhythm of existence sufficed. Outside, the mountains remained immense and serene, the river flowed endlessly, and the forest whispered with the wind. The day was beginning, yet the world was suspended in gentle calm. Each stone, each tree, each droplet of water carried history, memory, and the slow, patient pulse of life. The inn had awakened, yet not fully. It existed in the liminal space between night and day, between dream and reality, between the past and the present. And as the traveler stepped onto the veranda, looking out over the valley, they felt it fully, the delicate, persistent heartbeat of the mountains, the inn, and the forest. Steam rose in curling spirals, leaves glimmered with dew, and the river murmured its endless song. In that moment, the traveler knew the inn was more than a place to rest. It was a sanctuary, a conduit, a rhythm that could be felt but not named. They closed their eyes briefly, letting the sounds, scents, and warmth envelop them completely. The inn hummed with life, yet remained still. The mountains watched quietly. The valley exhaled. And the morning, soft and golden, unfolded endlessly. Chapter 2: The Whispering Streams. Morning deepened slowly in the valley. The sun, still low behind the mountains, cast long fingers of light through the forest canopy. Each ray pierced the lingering mist, scattering into countless beams that shimmered between branches and leaves. The air, touched by the warmth of dawn yet cooled by the breath of the river, carried a harmony that belonged only to the mountains. The travelers stepped beyond the inn's wooden gate, following the narrow stone path that wound down toward the river. The stones were slick with moss, the edges softened by years of rainfall. Tiny streams ran beside the path, slipping through ferns and wildflowers, whispering secrets to the earth as they went. It was a sound neither loud nor faint, but steady, eternal. The kind of sound that seemed to fill the spaces between thoughts. The forest greeted the traveler not with noise, but with stillness, a living, breathing silence. Cedars towered high, their trunks dark and glistening from the morning mist. The scent of their bark was rich and deep, mingling with the earthy fragrance of wet soil. Each footstep pressed softly into the ground, cushioned by layers of fallen needles. Overhead, a bird called, its voice clear and brief, disappearing into the canopy like a drop of rain into the sea. The traveler paused by a stream where the path met a small wooden bridge. The bridge was old, its planks darkened with time and moisture, its railing polished smooth by countless hands. Water flowed beneath, gliding over stones with a sound that was half song, half breath. Bubbles rose and burst quietly, catching sunlight in fleeting flashes. The traveler leaned over the railing, watching the current. Within the water, small fish moved in slow, deliberate arcs. Their scales shimmered like liquid silver. A fallen leaf drifted by, caught briefly in a swirl before being carried onward. The traveler watched it disappear downstream, the ripples it left behind widening, softening, fading. There was something about that motion graceful, inevitable that stirred a quiet ache inside them. It was the same ache that came when realizing how gently time passes, even when unnoticed. They continued walking. The forest floor sloped downward, and the sound of the river grew stronger. Mist hung low along the water, coiling between rocks, brushing against moss-covered trunks. Sunlight slipped through the fog in golden sheets, painting the surface of the river in rippling fragments of light. The air shimmered, alive yet unhurried. Every droplet, every leaf seemed aware of its place, of its belonging. A narrow clearing appeared where the stream split in two. In the center stood a cluster of stones, smooth, round, ancient. Water flowed around them, murmuring, as though speaking to the stones in a language older than memory. The traveler knelt beside the stream, placing their hand in the current. It was cold, startlingly clear, and alive. The feeling reached through their skin, through their muscles, into something deeper, a connection not of mind but of presence. Birdsong returned, this time closer. A thrush alighted on a nearby branch, its feathers trembling slightly as it began to sing. Each note was delicate, crystalline, yet it filled the forest with warmth. The traveler closed their eyes. The song, the water, the wind, the faint rustle of leaves all merged into one sound, an endless, breathing harmony. It was as if the world had forgotten how to hurry. Farther along the path, a small shrine appeared, almost hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss. It was built of stone, weathered and covered in lichen. The wood of its offering box darkened with time. A rope hung from the roof, its fibers frayed but still strong, swaying slightly in the breeze. A few coins rested inside, their metal dull and green from years of rain. The traveler bowed lightly, then struck the small bell with a gentle pull of the rope. The sound that followed was soft, clear, and hauntingly pure. It drifted through the trees, carried by the wind, mingling with the murmuring of the streams. The forest seemed to listen. Even the river paused in rhythm for a heartbeat, as though acknowledging the tone. The traveler whispered a silent wish, not of gain or change, but of stillness, of being part of the moment without resistance. They lingered there for a time, watching the patterns of sunlight and shadow dance across the mossy stones. The light shifted, rippled, vanished, and returned like the breathing of the earth. The traveler felt their thoughts loosen, the edges of worry dissolving in the rhythm of the forest. Here, time did not pass in lines but in circles, slow and perfect. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the inn of pine smoke and steeped tea leaves. It reminded the traveler that the world beyond this place still existed, yet distant and gentle, softened by the air of the mountains. The breeze stirred the surface of the water, and for a moment, it seemed to whisper words, though none could be understood. As they walked back toward the inn, the traveler noticed how the forest changed with each step. Shadows deepened and lightened in turn, revealing hidden details, tiny mushrooms blooming from fallen logs. Droplets of water clinging to spider silk, the faint tracks of a fox along the mud. Every detail carried life, quiet, deliberate, patient. Crossing the bridge again, the traveler paused. The river's song was different now. It had grown softer, almost thoughtful. They realized it was not the river that had changed, but their listening. What once sounded like murmuring now sounded like language, the language of movement, of continuity, of endless flow. At the edge of the path stood a large stone lantern. Inside its hollow space burned a small candle, though no one could have lit it recently. Its flame flickered gently, unbothered by the breeze, as though fed not by wax but by the very air of the valley. The traveler watched it, transfixed. The flame reflected in their eyes, small but steady, a mirror of life itself. By the time they returned to the inn, the morning had ripened into full day. The mist had lifted, revealing the mountains in clear relief. Steam rose from the bathhouse again, curling upward like prayers. The sound of water echoed faintly through the open corridors. Somewhere, a door slid shut with a wooden sigh. The traveler paused at the threshold, feeling both outside and within, between forest and inn, between solitude and belonging. They looked once more toward the river, now a ribbon of light in the distance. Its song lingered in their ears, soft, rhythmic, eternal. Then they stepped back inside, into the warm breath of the inn. The innkeeper was tending the hearth, adding a small bundle of wood. The scent of burning cedar filled the air. She glanced up briefly and smiled, her expression saying more than words ever could. The traveler nodded, returning the smile. They sat near the window, gazing out at the garden where droplets still hung from every blade of grass, catching sunlight in tiny sparks. The inn was alive with silence again. Guests whispered, the kettle sang its low song, and outside, the streams continued their endless murmuring. The traveler felt a deep calm spreading through them. A quiet understanding that this place, this valley, this inn, this morning was not just a moment but a state of being. The mountains would continue to breathe, the streams would continue to whisper, and the steam from the baths would rise forever into the cool, waiting air. And perhaps, if one listened closely enough, those whispers of water would reveal something more, not words, but truth. The truth that every droplet, every breeze, every pulse of silence carried the same message. Be still. You are already part of the flow. Chapter 3: The Lanterns of Evening. Evening arrived quietly, like a long exhale from the mountains. The sun, after lingering over the western ridge, sank slowly into the folds of cloud, leaving streaks of crimson and amber across the sky. The valley darkened by degrees, its edges softened by mist rising once again from the streams. Pines turned to silhouettes, their tops vanishing into violet haze. The river, now calmer than before, reflected the fading light in trembling ribbons of gold. The traveler sat on the veranda of the inn, a cup of tea cooling in their hands. The air had changed, it was thicker, heavier with the scent of evening dew and distant wood smoke. Cicadas had grown quiet, replaced by the faint chirping of crickets hidden among the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a frog croaked a solitary note that echoed softly through the valley. The world was shrinking into gentleness. Inside the inn, the sounds of the evening preparations began. The sliding of shoji doors, the faint rustle of linen as futons were laid out, the muffled footsteps of the innkeeper moving from room to room. The crackle of the hearth whispered in rhythm with the sigh of the wind. Lanterns were lit, one by one. Their warm glow spilled across wooden beams and tatami floors, chasing away the deepening shadows with a tenderness that no sunlight could replicate. Outside, the mist thickened once again, curling like the breath of some ancient spirit. Lanterns placed along the stone path flickered softly, their paper shades trembling with the evening breeze. Each flame seemed alive, swaying gently, bowing to the air and then rising again, as though performing a quiet dance of gratitude. The traveler rose, setting the teacup aside, and stepped down onto the path. The stones beneath their feet were cool, and the air smelled faintly of rain that had not yet fallen. Above, the first stars began to appear, tiny glimmers, fragile but persistent. The traveler followed the row of lanterns that led to the garden, their footsteps slow and measured, each breath drawn carefully in rhythm with the night. The garden was transformed under the lantern light. Moss gleamed like emerald silk. Water trickled softly through a bamboo spout, striking a stone basin with a sound that seemed to count time differently, slower, deeper, more deliberate. Chrysanthemum patterns of sand rippled faintly in the dim light, disturbed only by the breeze. The air shimmered faintly, as though filled with memory. At the edge of the garden stood a single cherry tree. Its blossoms were still shy, not yet in full bloom, but a few petals had opened, pale and luminous against the darkening sky. One petal drifted down, brushing against the surface of the water before vanishing. The traveler watched it disappear, realizing how fragile and eternal such a moment could feel. Behind them, the inn glowed softly. Its paper windows shimmered with warm light. The silhouettes of people moved gently within, someone folding blankets, another pouring tea, the innkeeper kneeling by the hearth. It was a painting in motion, a world that breathed without haste. The scent of incense drifted from one of the rooms, thin and subtle, blending perfectly with the scent of wood smoke and damp air. The traveler returned inside. The inn's interior felt like another realm, one defined not by distance but by temperature, sound, and scent. Tatami exhaled its faint straw fragrance. Steam from the baths lingered in the hallways, mingling with the sweet, smoky air of candle wax. Every beam of wood, every knot and grain, seemed to absorb the golden light, releasing it slowly like memory. Dinner was served quietly. A tray was placed before the traveler, rice still steaming, miso soup, pickled vegetables, and a small piece of grilled river fish. Its skin glistening faintly in the light. The simplicity of it carried comfort deeper than words. The innkeeper bowed gently before leaving the room, her presence as serene as the evening itself. The traveler ate slowly, listening to the quiet. Each bite seemed to carry the essence of the valley, the freshness of the water, the warmth of the fire, the patience of the earth. Outside, the river murmured on, its voice blending with the whisper of wind through the eaves. It was as though the entire landscape was breathing together, each sound a heartbeat of the mountain. After the meal, the traveler slid open the shoji and stepped once more onto the veranda. The night had deepened. The stars were clearer now, their light faint but unwavering. Lanterns along the path glowed like distant constellations, their reflections trembling in the shallow pools left by the day's mist. Steam still rose faintly from the baths, forming ghostly trails that drifted upward and vanished into the dark sky. Somewhere nearby, the soft ring of a wind chime echoed a note pure and lingering. It swayed with the rhythm of the air, each sound slightly different, shaped by the invisible currents that passed through the valley. The traveler closed their eyes. The sound was simple, yet it seemed infinite, as though the night itself was humming. The innkeeper appeared once more, carrying a small lantern of her own. She placed it beside the traveler, the paper shade glowing softly. For a moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them was full and alive. Finally, she said, "The mountain sleeps lightly tonight." Her voice was soft, almost part of the air itself. The traveler nodded, watching the lantern's flame waver. The words felt less like a comment and more like an observation of something larger, something shared. The innkeeper bowed slightly, then disappeared down the hall, her footsteps fading into the hush. The traveler remained where they were, gazing out at the lanterns beyond the veranda. Their flickering lights seemed to echo the stars above, small, fragile, and yet impossibly persistent. As the night deepened, the valley grew quieter still. The river's murmur softened, the crickets slowed their rhythm, and even the wind moved with care. The lanterns swayed gently, their flames bending toward one another as if whispering secrets. The traveler leaned back, feeling the warmth of the air. The faint vibration of life that pulsed through every wooden beam, every drop of water, every breath of steam. Time no longer felt like a line. It was a circle, soft and endless, expanding and contracting with each sound. The mountains held the night like a mother holds a sleeping child, protective, infinite, tender. And the inn, with its glowing lanterns and breathing walls, was at the heart of that embrace. The traveler's eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the tea, the rhythm of the water, the whispering lanterns all wove together into a gentle lullaby. The world outside faded into a shimmer of gold and shadow. Steam curled above the baths. Light trembled on the walls. And in that tender stillness, between waking and dreaming, the traveler's thoughts dissolved into silence. The mountains breathed. The lanterns swayed. And somewhere, beyond the veil of mist, a stream continued to whisper softly, endlessly guiding the valley into sleep. Chapter 4: The Dreams Beneath the Steam. Night deepened over the mountains, slow and deliberate. The last traces of daylight faded from the peaks, leaving only the faint glow of the half-moon suspended above the valley. Mist rose once more from the earth, curling around stones and trees, drifting like forgotten thoughts through the quiet air. The river's song had softened into a low hum, an endless, breathing rhythm that seemed to cradle the world in sleep. Inside the inn, the lanterns flickered gently. Their light shimmered through the thin paper screens, tracing ghostly patterns across the tatami. The sound of the hearth was faint but constant, a low murmur of flame-consuming cedar. Now and then, the wooden beams creaked softly, as though stretching in the cool air. It was the sound of a living building, old and patient, breathing with the rhythm of its guests. The traveler lay upon the futon, eyes half open. The warmth from the evening bath still lingered in their skin. Outside, the wind moved through the bamboo groves, carrying with it the scent of water and pine. Each breath brought new textures of sound, the sigh of the trees, the faint dripping from the eaves, the distant croak of a frog somewhere by the stream. Sleep came not as a sudden descent but as a gradual unfolding. The world outside dimmed, edges softening, sounds merging into one another until they became indistinguishable from the rhythm of breath. The boundaries between body and air, between thought and silence, began to blur. And then, without realizing when, the traveler was walking again, though their feet did not touch the ground, and the mist no longer felt cold but weightless, like a thought taking form. They found themselves upon a familiar path. The same stones, the same curve of the river, the same low hum of insects filled the air. But the lanterns along the way were brighter now, too bright, almost celestial. Their light moved with a rhythm, pulsing like heartbeats, casting the forest in alternating shadows and gold. The traveler moved forward, and the forest breathed around them. Trees whispered, though no wind stirred their leaves. The sound was soft, almost like words spoken in a forgotten language. The air shimmered with faint motes of light, drifting lazily like fireflies, though no insects could be seen. The stream that had murmured so quietly during the day now glowed faintly, as if starlight flowed through it instead of water. The traveler knelt beside the stream. Their reflection wavered, splitting into ripples that did not quite fade. Within those ripples, other images emerged: a woman kneeling by the bath, pouring water from a wooden ladle, a lantern. Swaying by an open shoji, the innkeeper's face illuminated by the soft glow of the hearth. Each vision drifted past, dissolving like mist when touched. The traveler whispered, though they were not sure to whom, "Where am I?" The forest answered, not with words, but with movement. Mist thickened, curling upward in soft spirals. It took shape not fully human, yet not entirely formless. A figure emerged, luminous and pale, eyes deep as mountain water. When it spoke, its voice carried the tone of water flowing over stone, gentle and ancient. "This is the place between breath and silence," it said. "The place where the mountain remembers." The traveler felt no fear, only recognition, as though they had been here countless times before. They bowed slightly, unsure whether the gesture came from respect or instinct. The figure's presence was both near and far. Its outline wavered like steam above the hot springs. "You came seeking rest," the spirit continued. "But rest is not the same as stillness. Stillness is what lies beneath the steam, beneath the sound of the river, beneath your own heartbeat." The traveler looked down at the water again. The reflection no longer showed their face, but scenes from the valley itself, the inn, glowing softly in the night, the river winding endlessly beneath the bridge, the lanterns swaying in invisible wind. Each image pulsed with light, as if alive. "What am I seeing?" they asked. The spirit tilted its head, its expression unreadable. "You are seeing what the mountain dreams," it said. "When you sleep, you share in that dream. Each breath you take here, each sound you hear, it belongs to something older than you." The words lingered in the air, vibrating softly before dissolving into the hum of the forest. The traveler closed their eyes. When they opened them again, they were standing before the inn. But it was not quite the same inn. The walls shimmered faintly, and the paper doors glowed as if lit from within by starlight. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine and cedar. The traveler stepped closer, sliding the door open. Inside, steam drifted lazily through the halls. It moved like living breath, coiling gently around beams and screens, shifting with purpose as though carrying memory. From somewhere within, the faint sound of the wind chime echoed. The tone was identical to the one from the waking world, yet softer now, like a distant echo carried across water. The traveler followed the sound, barefoot, their steps making no noise against the tatami. They passed through empty rooms, each one illuminated by soft, golden light that seemed to come from nowhere. In one, a futon was laid out perfectly, as though waiting. In another, the sliding door was half open, revealing the faint outline of the garden bathed in silver mist. Everywhere, steam curled and drifted, its motion hypnotic, endless. At last, they reached the bath. The water shimmered with faint light, as if stars had fallen into it and dissolved. The traveler knelt by the edge. The steam rose around them, and for a moment, they could no longer tell where the air ended and their body began. They reached into the water. It was warm, comforting, familiar, infinite. When they lifted their hand, droplets clung to their skin, glowing faintly before evaporating into the air. Each droplet seemed to hum, to vibrate with a sound too subtle for the ear but felt deep within the chest. The sound was the same rhythm as the river's current, as the wind in the pines, as the steady beat of the heart. A voice soft, distant whispered through the steam. Everything flows. Everything returns. Even you. The traveler closed their eyes again. The warmth deepened, pulling them gently downward, not with force, but with tenderness. Their thoughts dissolved like ink in water. There was no time here, no weight, no separation between self and world. Only rhythm, breath, and the sound of water. When the traveler awoke, the lanterns were dim. The moonlight filtered through the paper screens, and the air was cool again. The hearth had burned low, leaving only a faint scent of smoke. For a moment, they could not tell whether they had dreamed or remembered something that had always existed. They sat up slowly. Outside, the river's voice was soft, steady. The mist had returned to its quiet place among the stones. A single lantern still burned outside the veranda, its flame bending gently in the dawn breeze. The traveler watched it flicker. The light seemed familiar, ancient, and alive. Perhaps it was the same flame they had seen within the dream, or perhaps the dream itself was still unfolding, quietly, beneath the waking world. They lay back down upon the futon, and the scent of tatami rose softly around them. The sound of water lulled them once more, the same eternal rhythm they had heard beneath the steam, the same that pulsed within their chest. And as their eyes closed, they realized that the dream had not ended, it had simply widened, until it included everything: the mountain, the river, the inn, the breath, the silence. Chapter 5: The Dawn That Remembers. Before the first light touched the ridge of the mountains, the world was suspended in a delicate stillness. The mist lay thick upon the valley, breathing slowly like a great animal at rest. The inn, half shrouded in the pale fog, seemed to hover between dream and waking. No footsteps yet disturbed the corridor. No voices, no clatter of utensils, no motion but that of the faint drifting of steam from the bathhouse. The travelers stirred in their futon, not quite awake, not quite dreaming. The body felt weightless, the skin cool where the night air had brushed against it. Through the paper screen, the faintest light began to bloom, soft, gray, hesitant. It crept across the tatami like a memory returning from the edges of sleep. The traveler opened their eyes. The air felt clean, purified by the long silence of the night. Each breath carried the scent of cedar smoke, wet earth, and the subtle sweetness of tatami. It was a scent that spoke of continuity, of things that had endured, quietly, through centuries of dawns just like this one. They rose, sliding open the shoji door with care. A rush of cool air entered, carrying with it the faint murmur of the river and the first distant cry of a morning bird. Mist still cloaked the garden, soft and luminous. The stones of the path were slick with dew, each one glinting faintly like a hidden star. Beyond the veranda, the mountains were only silhouettes, their peaks veiled by drifting cloud. But slowly, imperceptibly, the darkness thinned. A pale line of silver appeared above the ridge, fragile at first, then brightening with each heartbeat. The world began to breathe again. The traveler stepped outside. The air was cool enough to sting the lungs, yet there was life in it, a promise. The sound of water grew clearer as the mist parted. From somewhere in the upper valley, a stream sang its endless song, freshened by snowmelt. The trees, wet with dew, seemed to glisten as though each leaf held a secret shard of sunlight waiting to be released. The traveler followed the stone path toward the outer bath. No one else was awake. The lanterns that had burned through the night were nearly spent, their flames small and trembling, but still alive. Their light wavered against the mist, casting gentle halos that swelled and faded like breaths. The traveler undressed slowly, folding the yukata neatly beside the wooden tub. When they stepped into the water, warmth enveloped them completely. The heat sank deep into muscle and bone, dissolving the last traces of sleep. steam rose, mingling with the mist of dawn until both became indistinguishable. For a while, there were no thoughts. Only sensation: the touch of water, the rhythm of the breath, the faint hum of the valley. The traveler leaned back, gazing up at the pale sky as it shifted from silver to faint rose. Clouds drifted like thin brush strokes, slow and graceful. Somewhere beyond them, the sun waited, hidden but inevitable. The river's voice deepened as more of it became visible through the lifting fog. A small bird darted from one branch to another, its wings scattering droplets of dew that caught the growing light. The traveler closed their eyes. The warmth of the water, the cool air upon the face, the faint bird calls all fused into a single harmony. It felt less like being alive and more like being remembered. As the first true rays of sunlight reached the valley, the mist began to retreat in ribbons. It coiled upward, revealing more of the landscape with each passing breath. The curved roof of the inn, glistening with moisture, the rows of pine trees descending toward the river, and the narrow footbridge crossing the stream, its wood darkened by years of rain and sun. A memory stirred of walking that bridge in the dream, of the spirit's voice speaking from the mist. The words echoed faintly now, like ripples in still water. Stillness is what lies beneath the steam, beneath the sound of the river, beneath your own heartbeat. The traveler looked toward the mountains, wondering if the dream had been only that or something the dawn had allowed them to glimpse. Either way, the feeling it left behind was real, a quiet understanding that everything, even rest, was part of a larger rhythm. They left the bath reluctantly, the body light and renewed. When they stepped onto the veranda, the mist was nearly gone. The valley lay open and green beneath the brightening sky. The inn's roof glowed faintly in the sunlight. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, thin, blue, fragrant. Inside, the sounds of morning had begun: the faint clatter of porcelain, the rhythmic brushing of tatami mats, the low murmur of voices. The inn was awakening, gently, as though it too had been dreaming. The innkeeper appeared in the corridor, bowing as she passed. Her hair was neatly tied, her steps light despite her years. She carried a tray of breakfast, steam rising from the bowls. When she saw the traveler standing by the open door, she smiled softly. "Good morning," she said. "The mountains remembered you." The traveler blinked, unsure if they had heard correctly. But her expression was serene, untroubled, as though her words were perfectly ordinary. She set the tray down upon the low table: rice, miso soup, pickled plums, grilled river fish, and a small bowl of simmered vegetables. Everything looked humble, yet radiant in the morning light. As the traveler ate, the world outside grew brighter. Sunlight poured through the shoji, painting the tatami in rectangles of gold. Steam rose from the miso soup in slender threads that caught the light, twisting like small spirits returning to the air. Each flavor carried the taste of the valley, the salt of the river breeze, the sweetness of spring water, the earthiness of roots grown in mountain soil. When the meal was done, the traveler stepped once more outside. The sun had fully risen now, warm and resolute. The sky was clear except for a few pale clouds lingering over the highest peak. A single hawk circled lazily above, its cry thin and sharp in the vast air. The river glistened like a living ribbon, winding endlessly through the valley. The stones along its banks sparkled with dew, and the air was alive with the scent of pine resin warming in the sunlight. It was as though the world had been washed clean, recreated. The traveler wandered down the path that led toward the river bank. Each step made a soft sound against the damp earth. Wildflowers, small and delicate, grew among the stones, white, yellow, pale violet. Bees moved between them lazily, still waking from the cool of the night. By the river, the water was clear enough to see every pebble below. Tiny fish darted through the shallows, flashes of silver and shadow. The traveler knelt, trailing their fingers through the current. The water was cold, quick, alive. Its sound was the same rhythm they had heard in the dream, in the steam, in their own heartbeat. A breeze stirred the surface, carrying with it a single petal from somewhere unseen. It landed upon the water and drifted downstream. The traveler watched it go, realizing that the petal, the river, the mountains, even the dream all moved in one endless flow. They closed their eyes, listening. The wind whispered through the pines, the river sang below, and the sun warmed their skin with the gentlest of touches. It was enough. They rose and looked back toward the inn. From this distance, it seemed part of the landscape itself, wood and stone and memory woven into the mountain's skin. Smoke curled lazily upward from the chimney, and the faint ring of the wind chime drifted once more through the air. The traveler smiled, a quiet, inward gesture. They did not know where their path would lead next, whether down the mountain or deeper into its silence. But it did not matter. The mountain remembered. And now, so did they. The sun climbed higher. The mist was gone. The valley shone with quiet life. And the sound of the river, ancient, endless, unchanged, continued to whisper its patient truth beneath the brightening sky. Chapter 6: The Path Beyond the Pines. The morning had ripened into gold. Sunlight poured down the slopes of the mountains, gliding across treetops still heavy with dew. The river sparkled below, its song clear and unhurried, weaving through the valley like a thread of living glass. The air, crisp and sweet, carried the mingled scent of pine, earth, and the faint lingering smoke from the inn's hearth. The travelers stood by the gate of the inn, their pack slung lightly across their shoulder. The innkeeper bowed deeply, hands folded before her chest. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft like water brushing over stones. "May the mountain remember your footsteps," she said. It was not a farewell, but a blessing. The traveler returned the bow. Words felt unnecessary. Silence held more meaning in this place. They stepped beyond the gate, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Behind them, the inn seemed to sigh, the sound of wood adjusting in the morning warmth, the whisper of paper screens catching the breeze. For a moment, the traveler turned back. The building stood in its quiet dignity, half veiled in sunlight, half in shadow. Steam still rose faintly from the bathhouse, drifting upward like the last trace of a dream. The wind chime by the eaves gave a final, gentle ring, as if acknowledging the traveler's departure. Then they began to walk. The path wound gently downward, bordered by tall pines whose trunks stood like silent guardians. Each step was cushioned by a carpet of needles, soft and fragrant. Birdsong echoed faintly through the branches, short, bright phrases that rose and fell like the mountain's own breath. A breeze moved through the forest, stirring the canopy into a quiet, endless conversation. As the traveler descended, the air grew warmer. The sound of the river followed, sometimes distant, sometimes close, always constant. Now and then, sunlight pierced the trees, casting shifting patterns upon the ground, bright mosaics of gold and shadow that danced with every step. The forest smelled of life, deep and unmeasured, of moss, of wet bark, of the faint sweetness of unseen blossoms. Time felt different here. The traveler could not tell how long they had walked. It might have been minutes, or hours, or an entire lifetime folded into a single stretch of silence. The rhythm of footsteps, the pulse of the river, the sigh of the wind all blended into something beyond the counting of time. After a while, the path opened into a clearing. From here, the traveler could see far across the valley. The mist that had blanketed it at dawn was gone, replaced by a shimmering clarity that made every detail vivid: the curve of the river, the thatched roofs of distant houses, the fields that gleamed with water from the mountain streams. The traveler sat upon a stone and rested. The pack pressed lightly against their back, warm from the sun. Birds darted through the open air, their wings flashing like fragments of glass. Somewhere below, the faint echo of a temple bell drifted upward, a sound so pure and remote it felt like memory itself. The traveler closed their eyes. The mountain's quiet lingered within them, not as sound but as presence. It was a stillness that had depth, like a pool of water untouched by wind. In that stillness, everything was remembered: the steam rising in the night, the lanterns trembling in mist, the dream voice speaking of stillness beneath the steam, and the innkeeper's gentle smile at dawn. They realized then that the mountain was not a place left behind, but a rhythm carried forward within breath, within heartbeat, within silence itself. A soft rustle interrupted their thoughts. From the edge of the clearing, a deer stepped quietly into view. Its coat gleamed with moisture, its eyes dark and calm. For a long moment, it looked directly at the traveler. No fear, no curiosity, only recognition, as though it too understood the rhythm of the mountain. Then, as silently as it had come, it turned and disappeared among the trees. The traveler watched the place where it had stood until even the sound of its movement faded. They rose, brushed the dust from their sleeves, and continued down the path. The forest thinned gradually. The pines gave way to maples and birches, their leaves catching the sunlight and turning it into 1,000 small flames. The air smelled different now, warmer, fuller, touched with the faint scent of flowers from the lower valleys. The traveler could hear distant signs of life: the clatter of a wooden cart, the bark of a dog, the faint laughter of children carried on the wind. And yet, even as the world grew more familiar, the quiet of the mountain remained within them. Each step felt deliberate, as though echoing an older journey. They thought of the spirit's words: "Everything flows. Everything returns." Perhaps, they thought, that was the truth of travel itself: not to move from place to place, but to circle back through silence until one understood how to listen. At a bend in the road, they paused once more. Looking back, they could still see the peaks of the mountain rising beyond the forest. They seemed impossibly high now, veiled in pale cloud. But the traveler knew that behind that veil, the inn still stood: steam rising, lanterns glowing, the wind chime whispering to the passing breeze. For a moment, they thought they could hear it even now, that soft, crystalline sound that had guided them through the night. Perhaps it was only imagination, or perhaps the mountain truly remembered, as the innkeeper had said. The traveler smiled faintly. They bowed toward the peaks, a gesture of gratitude, not farewell. Then they turned once more toward the valley and began walking. The sun climbed higher. The shadows shortened. The scent of pine faded, replaced by the aroma of soil and flowering fields. Ahead, the road widened, winding gently toward the village. Yet even as the sound of human life grew nearer, the traveler could still feel the mountain's breath, soft, patient, eternal, moving through them with every inhalation. It was no longer something they observed, it was part of them now. At the edge of the village, they paused again. The river flowed beside the path, bright and laughing in the sunlight. Children played by the bank, their voices rising like birds. The traveler watched them for a while, smiling. The rhythm was different here, faster, louder, more vivid, but beneath it all, the same pulse continued, the one that began in the mountains, beneath the steam, beneath the stillness. They crossed a small wooden bridge, the planks creaking softly underfoot. A gust of wind lifted the hem of their sleeve, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and smoke. When they looked up, the clouds above the mountains had begun to scatter, revealing a deep blue sky that seemed to stretch forever. The traveler took a deep breath. The air was warm now, full of life. Yet somewhere in that warmth, they could still taste the cool of the mountain spring, still hear the hush of mist drifting through cedar trees. It was not something they would ever lose. They walked on until the sound of the river merged with the hum of the village, until the scent of tatami and cedar gave way to that of cooking fires and blooming fields. And still, deep within, the rhythm of the mountain continued to beat, slow, steady, and eternal. The path curved once more, disappearing between trees that shimmered with sunlight. As the traveler stepped forward, the world around them seemed to bow in quiet recognition, the trees bending slightly, the river softening its voice, the breeze pausing just long enough to carry one last whisper from far above. The mountain remembers. The traveler smiled, closed their eyes for a moment, and continued walking, the sound of footsteps fading gently into the vast, forgiving silence of the day. Epilogue: steam and silence. The path was behind him now. The traveler had descended from the mountains, crossed the bridge, and entered the plain where spring sunlight shimmered across the fields. Yet even as the day warmed and the air grew bright with life, a trace of mist still followed, soft, unseen, but always near. It was not the mist of the valley, nor the steam of the bathhouse. It was something lighter, quieter, a remembrance that clung not to the body but to the breath. He paused at the edge of the village road. Children laughed nearby, chasing a ball made of woven straw. Old men sat before their shops, mending baskets, their hands moving slowly, surely, in rhythm with time itself. The scent of rice straw and wood smoke mingled in the air, carrying with it the faint echo of pine from higher ground. The traveler closed his eyes and listened. The sounds were human now, bright, imperfect, filled with movement. And yet, beneath them, he could still hear it, the deep, steady pulse of the mountains. The rhythm that had guided his sleep, the same that hummed beneath the surface of the world like a hidden current. He smiled faintly. The mountain was not behind him. It lived within every sound that reached his ears, every breath drawn into his lungs. It lived within the stillness between heartbeats. He began to walk again, following the winding road that led toward the distant sea. Fields stretched wide to either side, some freshly plowed, others already alive with the green of new shoots. A pair of cranes glided overhead, their wings cutting the air with effortless grace. Their cries, sharp and haunting, echoed across the sky and faded into the horizon. He thought of the spirit's words, of the innkeeper's quiet blessing, of the soft glow of lanterns trembling in the mist. They did not feel like memories but like small, living lights that continued to burn quietly within him. When the road curved, he found a small shrine beneath a willow tree. Its wood was old, softened by years of rain and sunlight. Moss crept along the stones, and a single ladle rested beside the basin of clear water. The traveler knelt, washing his hands. The water was cold, startlingly pure. As it flowed over his skin, it carried away the dust of the road and the lingering warmth of the morning sun. He looked into the basin. The surface rippled, and for a moment, he thought he saw the reflection of the mountains again, not as they had been in sight, but as they had been in silence. The steam rising from the baths, the faint outline of the inn through the fog, the lanterns, the trees, the endless, breathing stillness. He bowed his head. It was not prayer, nor habit, simply a gesture of recognition, a small acknowledgement of the rhythm that continued to flow, unseen, through all things. When he rose, the wind had shifted. A soft breeze drifted from the north, carrying the scent of cedar. He knew then that the mountain had not vanished behind the ridges. It had simply changed its shape, become air, light, memory. He walked until the sun began to lower, until the horizon turned the color of warm tea. Shadows lengthened across the fields, and the first evening mist began to gather once more. It did not rise from any visible spring this time. It came from the ground itself, from the rivers, from the breathing of the earth. The traveler found a small inn by the roadside, a humble place with a wooden sign and a garden of stone lanterns. The owner greeted him with a bow, her smile calm and knowing. "Please, come in," she said. "The bath is warm." He followed her voice through the narrow hallway, his feet brushing softly against the floorboards. The air inside was familiar, the faint scent of tatami, of cedar, of steam. Somewhere beyond, a kettle whistled gently, and the sound of water pouring into porcelain carried through the quiet house. He entered the room and set down his pack. Through the paper screen, he could see the garden, small, yet perfectly tended. A single maple tree stood at its center, its leaves trembling in the soft wind of dusk. Steam rose faintly from a stone basin. It caught the fading sunlight and turned to silver. The sound of the water was the same as it had been in the mountains, as though all springs, all streams, all baths shared one single, unending source. The traveler smiled, removing his sandals. He walked out to the garden and knelt beside the basin. The water's warmth brushed his hands, and with it came that same quiet. Hummed the voice of the mountain, soft and patient, waiting beneath the surface of all things. When he returned inside, the room had grown dim. Lanterns were being lit in the corridor, their glow moving gently across the walls like slow, floating fireflies. The air shimmered faintly, as if the steam from some faraway spring had wandered down from the peaks to find him again. Dinner was simple rice, soup, pickles, and a small dish of simmered mushrooms. Each taste carried a quiet echo of the mountain, the sweetness of its water, the depth of its soil, the memory of its stillness. As he ate, the innkeeper's cat curled beside the hearth, purring softly in rhythm with the crackling of the fire. The sound was hypnotic, circular, endless. When the meal was done, the traveler moved toward the bath. Steam drifted from behind the sliding doors, curling like soft handwriting upon the air. He undressed and stepped inside. The water embraced him. It was neither too hot nor too cool, perfectly balanced, as though the mountain itself had chosen its temperature. The sound of dripping echoed through the bathhouse, each drop falling with slow precision, like the passing of time measured by silence instead of clocks. He leaned back, closed his eyes. The steam rose around him, thick and luminous, and within it, the boundaries of the world began to fade. The air, the water, the breath all became one slow, continuous motion. The traveler thought, for a fleeting moment, that he could hear the faint ringing of the wind chime from the mountain inn. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was simply the sound of water echoing in his chest. But it did not matter. Because in that sound, soft, patient, eternal, he felt again the presence of everything he had known, the spirits whisper beneath the steam, the lanterns trembling against the mist, the innkeeper bowing in the first light of dawn, the deer's silent gaze in the forest, the river flowing endlessly beneath the sky. He opened his eyes. The steam shimmered before him, and for a moment, he could not tell whether it was rising or falling, whether it was returning to the sky or descending from it. He smiled. Perhaps there was no difference. Perhaps all things mountain, water, dream, silence were simply one breath inhaled and exhaled forever. When he stepped out of the bath, the air was cool again. The lantern in the hallway flickered softly. He returned to his room, sliding the shoji closed behind him. Outside, the night had settled fully. The garden glowed faintly under the half-moon. He lay upon the futon, the scent of tatami rising around him. The sounds of the inn were few: the distant murmur of water, the faint creak of beams, the rhythm of the wind. Each sound seemed familiar, as though echoing from a place beyond memory. He exhaled slowly. The warmth from the bath still lingered in his skin, and as his heartbeat slowed, the stillness deepened until even thought became a kind of silence. The steam that had followed him through the day, through the valley, through the very fabric of time, now rose once more, not from the earth, but from within. It mingled with breath, with dream, with the invisible hum that wove the world together. And in that moment between waking and sleep, between sound and stillness, he understood that nothing had ever truly begun or ended. Everything was steaming. Everything was silent. And both were infinite. Outside, the wind passed softly through the pines. The moon hung above the valley, pale and unwavering. The inn breathed gently, its walls alive with warmth and memory. And within that breath, the traveler drifted not away, but deeper, into the endless rhythm beneath all things, where steam and silence were one. Wind chimes on a summer veranda. Prologue: the first wind chime. The first sound of summer came not from the cicadas, nor from the distant hum of the river below the hills, but from a single, trembling note of glass. It rang softly in the still air, a delicate sound, pure as morning light, carrying the scent of tatami and sunlight through the old house. The veranda faced south, its wooden boards pale with age and smoothed by countless bare feet. Beyond the garden wall, the world shimmered under the first true heat of July. The leaves of the persimmon tree glowed green, and somewhere, unseen, a dove cooed in the quiet. A young woman stood beneath the eaves, holding a wind chime. Its bell was made of thin glass, the color of clear water. Inside, a small strip of paper fluttered faintly, painted with a few simple strokes of blue that might have been sky or sea. She tied it carefully to the wooden beam above the veranda. The cord was fine, almost invisible, and for a moment the chime hung motionless, a fragile jewel caught between sunlight and shadow. Then, as the breeze stirred, it moved just slightly, just enough, and the first clear note sounded again. It was not loud, but it filled the space as if the house itself had been waiting for it. The woman smiled faintly. She stepped back and watched as the chime swayed, its reflection glimmering in the sliding door's glass. Inside the house, the scent of tatami drifted outward. A kettle hissed faintly in the kitchen, and the slow, rhythmic sound of a fan turning in the next room blended with the soft hum of the afternoon. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, the silence of a house that had known many summers, that carried the faint echo of laughter, the faint weight of time itself. The woman, her name was Aoi, sat down on the veranda's edge. The wood was warm beneath her palms. She could feel the faint vibration of cicadas somewhere beyond the garden wall, their voices not yet loud, still tentative, as if testing the air. The wind chime swayed again. Each time it rang, a new wave of memory seemed to unfold within her. A summer years ago, the same veranda, a pair of hands older than hers tying a chime in the same spot. "Listen," her grandmother had said then, kneeling beside her, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth after rain. "When you hear the chime, it means the wind has come to visit." Aoi had asked, "What does the wind say?" Her grandmother had smiled. "It tells the house to breathe." The memory faded slowly, like sunlight through paper. But the warmth of that voice lingered, carried by the faint rhythm of the bell above her. She closed her eyes. The world expanded into sound, the creak of bamboo. In the garden, the whisper of wind through leaves. The faint rush of a dragonfly's wings as it passed too close. Every note seemed to join the wind chime's tone, a chorus of small, living things. And through it all, she felt the same breath that her grandmother had spoken of, rising and falling, slow and patient, as though the entire summer were exhaling around her. The afternoon light deepened. The shadows of the persimmon leaves stretched across the veranda floor, trembling like the surface of water. Aoi leaned back against the pillar and let her thoughts drift. She could hear the sound of someone walking on the road beyond the gate, the soft crunch of gravel, the muted hum of a distant radio. Somewhere, a wind chime answered another, and for a moment it felt as if the sound was spreading from house to house, a gentle ripple moving through the sleepy village. The breeze shifted again. The strip of paper danced lightly, its painted lines catching the sunlight as if glowing from within. The chime's note hung in the air longer this time, slowly fading into silence that felt both new and ancient. Aoi thought of the summers before, the ones filled with the smell of watermelon, of soap bubbles catching the afternoon light, of her grandmother's laughter echoing through the garden. Now, only the house remained. The rooms still carried the same light, the same stillness, but they were emptier somehow, more fragile. Yet when the wind chime rang again, something in her chest loosened. It was as though the sound had reached across time, bridging the gap between what was gone and what still lived within the quiet. She stood and walked toward the open shoji. The house welcomed her with its coolness, the air faintly scented with cedar and tea leaves. Her bare feet made no sound on the tatami. She passed through the familiar rooms, the living room with its low table and fan, the hallway where light filtered in soft, golden bars. At the end of the hall stood a small alcove where her grandmother's photo rested, a bowl of fresh flowers beside it. The petals had begun to wilt slightly, but they still held the scent of the morning. Aoi replaced them with new ones, small white lilies she had picked from the garden. For a long moment she knelt there, listening to the silence between the notes of the chime outside. When she spoke, her voice was no louder than the sound of wind through paper. "It's summer again, Grandma." The chime answered softly. A faint smile touched her lips. She poured a cup of tea, the steam curling upward in pale ribbons. It caught the late sunlight and shimmered like the air outside, as though even the heat of the tea was part of the season's rhythm. When she carried it back to the veranda, the air had shifted again, the first hint of evening. The cicadas had grown louder now, their song swelling like the slow rising of a tide. The chime's clear tone floated between their calls, a thread of stillness amid the noise. Aoi sat and placed the cup beside her. The tea's surface reflected the moving light of the garden, and the faint shadow of the chime's paper strip drifted across it. The smell of earth, of leaves, of the cooling day filled the air. It was the same scent that had marked every summer. She could remember a mixture of warmth and distance, of beginnings and endings braided together. Somewhere nearby, a bamboo fountain clicked as it emptied, its wooden arm knocking gently against stone. The rhythm of it was steady, almost like breathing. The wind chime swayed again. Its voice was softer now, as though it too were growing drowsy in the heat. Aoi leaned her head against the post and let her eyes close. The warmth of the wood beneath her, the scent of the garden, the sound of the chime, they all folded together into one endless moment. The house seemed to breathe, just as her grandmother had said. And in that breath, Aoi felt something stir, not memory, but presence. The air moved gently against her cheek, a whisper that was almost a word, almost her name. She smiled without opening her eyes. The wind had come to visit. Outside, the world shimmered in the golden light of evening. The chime rang once more, clear, pure, timeless, and its sound carried across the fields, through the open windows of distant houses, into the heart of the sleeping village. It was the sound of summer's first promise, a note that would linger in the air. Long after the day had faded, long after the tea had cooled, long after even memory itself had grown quiet. Chapter 1: The House of Quiet Summers. The morning began with the soft hum of the fan. Its slow, rhythmic turning filled the room like the pulse of a quiet heart. Each rotation stirred the warm air just enough to brush the edge of the shoji screens, sending faint ripples of light and shadow dancing across the tatami. Outside, the sky was already pale and bright. The sunlight had the color of milk and gold, and the wind carried the faint smell of wet grass, of soil still holding the memory of dawn's dew. Somewhere beyond the garden, a single cicada called, hesitant at first, then stronger, as if reminding the world that summer was here to stay. Aoi sat by the low table in the main room, pouring tea into a small porcelain cup. The steam rose in slow curls, twisting and fading like thoughts that refused to stay. On the table lay a plate of watermelon slices, their red gleam softened by the morning light. She took a bite, and the sweetness spread across her tongue, cool, crisp, and fleeting. The sound of the cicada outside merged with the ticking of the wall clock, both marking time in their own patient ways. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was filled with the small, living sounds of summer, the faint crack of wood as it warmed, the sigh of the curtains. As the breeze drifted through, the distant splash of water from the garden pond where koi moved lazily beneath the surface. Aoi looked around. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a story: the worn cushions on the tatami, the small bamboo blinds by the veranda, the faint discoloration on the paper doors where the sunlight always fell. Her grandmother had lived here her entire life. The scent of her still lingered, a mix of green tea, camphor, and lavender oil. Aoi had once thought the smell belonged to the house itself, as natural and unchanging as the scent of rain or tatami. When she was a child, she would spend every summer here. The days would unfold slowly: morning chores, afternoon naps, evenings on the veranda watching fireflies drift through the dark. Her grandmother would hum softly while folding laundry, the sound blending with the chirping of crickets. Now, years later, the house remained the same. Only the silence was different. It was deeper, heavier, as though the house was holding its breath in her absence. Aoi rose and slid open the shoji. A rush of sunlight filled the room. The veranda outside gleamed with warmth, the wind chimes swaying gently where she had hung it the day before. Its tone was soft now, almost shy, as if the glass itself had grown sleepy in the heat. She stepped outside. The boards were warm beneath her bare feet, and she could feel the grain of the wood beneath her skin, smooth in some places, splintered in others. A butterfly drifted past, its wings the color of cream. It circled once above the garden pond and vanished into the shadows of the persimmon tree. The garden was small but perfectly kept. Moss grew in soft patches along the stepping stones, and a cluster of hydrangeas still held the last blush of early summer. A bamboo fence marked the edge of the property, beyond which the fields stretched wide and green, their edges trembling under the bright morning haze. She could hear the faint clatter of a bicycle on the distant road. A neighbor calling out, a dog barking once and then going quiet. It was all part of the same slow rhythm that filled the house. Aoi sat again on the veranda, resting her elbows on her knees. The sound of the wind chime drifted down, clear and round like drops of cool water falling into a still pond. Each note seemed to open something in her chest, not sadness exactly, but a quiet ache that had no name. She remembered the way her grandmother used to sit here, her fan resting in her lap, eyes half closed against the light. There had been no rush to her movements, no hurry in her voice. Every gesture had seemed to belong perfectly to the rhythm of the day. Aoi reached for the fan that still hung beside the door. Its handle was worn smooth from use. When she opened it, a faint scent of ink and paper rose into the air. It was painted with blue waves and a single swallow in flight. She waved it slowly, watching the paper ripple and catch the sunlight. The motion brought a faint breeze to her face, and with it, the sound of the wind chime deepened a low, soft tone that seemed to echo inside her rather than around her. The cicadas had grown louder now, their song rising in waves that rolled through the trees. Between their calls, the occasional note of the chime would surface, like the memory of water beneath the heat. She thought of the phrase her grandmother used to say every summer. When the wind stops, listen harder. The silence is still speaking. Aoi had never understood it as a child. But now, sitting alone on the veranda, she thought she could almost hear what her grandmother had meant. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. It held everything that had ever been said, and everything that didn't need to be. A shadow moved across the garden wall. The sun was climbing higher. The air shimmered with heat, and the sound of the cicadas became almost a vibration, a single long breath that filled the world. Aoi poured another cup of tea. The glass wind chime sang softly above her, and the house seemed to exhale. She leaned back, her gaze drifting upward through the lattice of the roof to the endless blue sky beyond. For a moment, she thought she saw something move within that sky, a faint ripple, like the shape of time itself bending around the sound of the chime. Then it was gone. Only the warmth remained, and the long, patient hum of summer all around her. Inside the house, the clock ticked once, marking the hour. The fan turned, the paper curtain stirred, and the wind chime rang again. It was enough. The sound was enough. Chapter 2: Cicadas and Distant Hills. By midday, the sound of cicadas had become a sea. It filled the air, heavy and unbroken, so that even the spaces between their cries seemed to shimmer with heat. Aoi stood at the edge of the garden path, a straw hat shading her eyes. The sun above her was white and merciless, its light pouring over the fields until everything seemed to tremble the grass. The air, even the distant hills themselves. She carried a small basket, empty for now, its handle wrapped with faded cloth. The plan was simple: to walk down to the edge of the fields, to pick wild herbs by the stream that ran along the road, and to return before the heat grew too heavy to bear. The gate creaked softly as she pushed it open. Beyond it, the narrow dirt road stretched between tall stalks of grass. The air smelled of dust and warm earth. Somewhere nearby, a dragonfly darted, its wings flashing silver in the sunlight. As she walked, the world seemed to hum in rhythm with her footsteps. The cicadas' song rose and fell like waves, their cries echoing against the green slopes that framed the valley. The distant sound of water reached her, a slow, steady murmur, the heartbeat of the afternoon. The fields were alive. She could see farmers bent low among the rows of rice, their wide hats moving gently above the green sea of stalks. From far off came the faint clatter of someone beating a carpet, then the laughter of children playing near the river. It all blended together into one sound, a continuous whisper of life beneath the sky. Aoi stopped for a moment and closed her eyes. The warmth pressed against her skin, but beneath it she felt the faint breath of wind, soft, patient, carrying the scent of water and sunlight. When she opened her eyes again, the hills in the distance seemed to shimmer, their outlines blurred by the haze. She had walked this path many times as a child, but now the landscape felt larger, deeper, as if each tree and stone had grown older with her. By the roadside, a row of small Jizo statues watched her pass. Their faces were worn smooth by rain and time. Someone had tied red bibs around their necks, faded now to a gentle rose color. She bowed slightly as she walked by, the way her grandmother had taught her. "Always greet the travelers of silence," her grandmother had said once. "Even the still ones are listening." The thought brought a faint smile to Aoi's lips. She touched the brim of her hat, as if tipping it to the little guardians, and continued on. The stream soon came into view, a thin ribbon of light winding through the tall reeds. Its surface sparkled where the sun touched it, and the sound of flowing water mingled with the cries of the cicadas, creating a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, as if the world itself were breathing through alternating notes of sound and silence. Aoi knelt by the edge and dipped her hand into the current. The coolness ran through her fingers, sliding away as quickly as it came. Tiny fish darted beneath the shadows of the rocks, their movements quick and clear as silver needles. She began to pick herbs, shiso, yomogi, and a few slender shoots of sansho. The basket filled slowly. The scent of the leaves clung to her hands, green and clean and sharp, a scent that felt older than memory. Above her, a cloud drifted across the sun. The world softened. The cicadas' cries became distant for a moment, and the breeze grew cooler. She looked up toward the hills, and for a brief instant, it seemed as though something moved within the light, a faint figure standing among the trees, white against the green, watching her. Her breath caught. But when she blinked, the shape was gone. Only the leaves moved, whispering faintly in the wind. She stayed still for a while, listening. The water murmured, the wind chime from her house far behind her rang faintly, though she was certain she had walked too far to hear it. Still, the sound lingered in her minda, single, delicate note floating between one heartbeat and the next. She rose, brushing dust from her knees. The sun emerged again from behind the cloud, and the fields lit up, alive once more with sound. By the time she turned back toward the house, the basket was nearly full. The air shimmered as she walked, and the wind carried the scent of warm straw and green water. The cicadas were relentless now, their song vibrating through her chest like a living pulse. When she reached the gate again, the house seemed to wait for her, still, bright, and quiet, as though it had never moved at all. The wind chime swayed as she entered. Its voice greeted her like an old friend. Inside, she placed the basket on the kitchen counter and began rinsing the herbs one by one. The sound of running water filled the small room, mixing with the faint hum of the fan. Steam rose as she boiled a pot of tea, and the fragrance of roasted barley drifted through the air. As she worked, the sense of being watched returned, not in fear, but in familiarity, as though the walls themselves were quietly observing her, remembering every motion, every sound. She poured the tea and carried it to the veranda. The sunlight had softened into gold now, and the hills beyond the village glowed faintly in the distance. The cicadas had begun to quiet, their rhythm slowing with the approach of evening. Aoi sat and took a sip. The tea was warm, its flavor deep and earthy. She could feel it spreading through her chest, settling something inside her that she hadn't realized was tense. The air was cooling, and the scent of the garden had changed, more shadows, more green, as if the earth itself was preparing to rest. The wind chime rang again, and she felt the sound move through her, not entering from the air, but rising from within, as if the house and her body shared the same breath. She remembered another afternoon long ago, sitting in the same spot while her grandmother told her stories of the mountain. They say that on clear days, her grandmother had whispered, "You can hear the voices of the hills themselves." Not words, exactly, but something like a song that only the wind can carry. Aoi had laughed back then, thinking it was only a story meant to charm a child. But now, as the day faded, she wondered if perhaps her grandmother had meant something else, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. The air trembled again, and she thought she heard it, a tone softer than the chime, rising from far away, as if the hills were sighing in their sleep. She closed her eyes. The sound of the cicadas faded. The warmth of the wood beneath her hands deepened. The tea cooled slowly by her side. And somewhere, between one breath and the next, the house exhaled. Again its voice carried by the wind, reaching out toward the hills that watched over it, joining their endless, drowsy song. Chapter 3: Rain on Tatami. The rain began without warning. One moment, the air was heavy and still, the garden shimmering with heat, and the next, the wind arrived, a low sigh that passed through the trees, bringing with it the scent of thunder and wet earth. Aoi had just finished washing the teacups when she heard the first drops. They struck the roof with a soft, uncertain rhythm, like fingertips testing the edge of a drum. Then came the rush, a curtain of silver falling through the air, the sound swelling until it filled every corner of the house. She slid open the shoji and stepped onto the veranda. The air was cool now, thick with the smell of rain-soaked soil and tatami. Beyond the eaves, the garden shimmered in gray light. The persimmon tree bent under the weight of water, its leaves trembling as droplets rolled down and vanished into the moss below. The wind chime swayed wildly, its tone no longer delicate but deep, almost mournful. Each ring seemed to echo against the rain, a fragile sound holding its own against the storm. Aoi sat on the edge of the veranda, bare feet touching the cool wood. The rain reached out just far enough to dampen her toes, each drop a soft touch against her skin. She remembered days like this from long ago when she was small, and her grandmother would light a lamp even in the afternoon, its glow turning the house golden against the gray. They would sit together, listening to the rain without speaking. Sometimes her grandmother would hum, a melody without words that drifted through the rooms and mingled with the steady rhythm of falling water. Aoi had always thought of that sound as part of the rain itself, as if her grandmother's voice was hidden somewhere inside the clouds. Now, sitting alone, she could almost hear it again. The house creaked softly. The smell of tatami deepened as the humidity rose, rich and earthy, a scent that carried with it 100 summers past. It was the smell of books and folded quilts, of the wooden floor beneath her grandmother's feet, of time breathing through the walls. The sound of the rain changed softer now, slower. The storm was moving away, leaving behind the gentle hiss of water falling from leaves and gutters. Aoi closed her eyes. The world seemed to shrink around her, until all that remained was the sound, the hush of rain, the low hum of the fan behind her, and the faint chime of glass moving in the breeze. She felt herself drifting, half awake, half asleep, the boundary between now and memory dissolving like mist. In that drowsy space, she heard her grandmother's voice clear, near, and kind. Do you know why the tatami smells sweetest when it rains? Aoi's lips parted, though she knew she was alone. Because the house is remembering, the voice continued, soft as wind. The rain brings back every summer that has passed. Every footstep, every word ever spoken here. It seeps into the floor, and the tatami breathes it all out again. Aoi smiled faintly. Her eyes opened to the dim glow of the room. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, each drop landing with a quiet patter that seemed to echo what the voice had said, a kind of whispering memory returning to the earth. She rose and went inside. The paper doors glowed faintly with the light from the garden, the patterns of raindrops traced in silver against their surface. In the alcove, her grandmother's photograph watched over the room. The smile in the picture was small, almost as if it had been caught mid-laugh. Beside it, a small incense burner still held the faint scent of yesterday's smoke. Aoi lit a new stick and placed it carefully. The flame flickered once before turning to ember, a thin line of smoke curling upward. It rose in slow spirals, twisting like the rain outside, until it reached the ceiling and faded into the dimness. The house felt warmer now, as though the rain had drawn its breath inward. She poured herself another cup of barley tea, the steam rising to meet the scent of incense. As she sat again on the veranda, she noticed how the garden had changed. The moss glowed deeper green. The stepping stones shone like ink. Even the air itself seemed softer, as if everything had been washed clean of sound. The wind chime moved gently, its tone fragile once more. Each note hung in the air longer than before, as though time had forgotten how to move forward. Aoi watched the ripples in the pond, where raindrops still fell from the leaves. The koi swam lazily beneath the surface, their orange bodies flickering like lanterns underwater. She leaned her head against the wooden pillar, feeling the faint vibration of the chime through the structure of the house. It reminded her of a heartbeat. The memory of her grandmother's song returned low, steady, a tune that rose and fell like the sound of the wind. Without meaning to, Aoi began to hum. The melody came easily, as if it had been waiting inside her all along. The sound filled the veranda, mingling with the rain, and for a brief moment, it felt as if she was not alone. There was a warmth beside her, like someone sitting close, their presence quiet and kind. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. Outside, the rain fell more slowly still, until it was only a mist clinging to the air. The world blurred the garden, the sky, the hills beyond. Everything softened into the same quiet gray. And through it all, the faint chime continued to sound not from above her, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere inside the stillness itself. When she finally rose, the rain had stopped completely. The air glowed with a pale light, the kind that only comes after a storm. She stepped into the garden. Her feet pressed softly into the damp earth, leaving faint impressions that filled slowly with water. The air was cool against her skin, the scent of moss and rain so strong it almost felt like a taste. A single droplet fell from the persimmon leaf and landed on her wrist. She watched it tremble, reflecting the faintest glimmer of light. And for a heartbeat, she thought she heard her grandmother's voice again, not words, but the same hum that had always filled rainy afternoons. The sound blended with the wind chime's soft ringing. Then both faded into silence. Aoi returned to the veranda and sat down once more. The sky above was clearing. A narrow ribbon of blue stretched between the clouds, and in that thin slice of brightness, a single swallow flew its wings, cutting through the air like a brushstroke on paper. The house exhaled again. The scent of tatami rose with the warmth of the wood. And in that moment, Aoi felt the truth of what her grandmother had said. The house remembers. The rain only helps it speak. Chapter 4. The lanterns glow. Evening settled like silk across the village. The last light of day stretched long and soft over the hills, turning the fields to gold, the roofs of houses to faint copper. The sound of the cicadas faded one by one, their endless chorus giving way to a deeper stillness, the sound of air cooling, of time slowing, of everything preparing for night. Aoi lit a lantern. It was a small paper one, painted with pale brushstrokes of plum blossoms. The flame inside was weak at first, a trembling spark that struggled against the weight of dusk. But soon it steadied, and its warm glow began to breathe across the veranda, painting the wood with honey-colored light. The wind chime moved gently above her head, its tone no longer bright, but softer, almost tired, as though even sound itself wished to rest. Aoi sat beside the lantern and poured tea into a small cup. The air was cool now. When she breathed, the scent of tatami and damp earth mingled with the faint sweetness of the paper flame. Beyond the veranda, the garden stretched into shadow, its shapes half-dreamed, the curve of the stone path, the ripple of the pond, the outline of the persimmon tree rising dark against the pale sky. The first firefly appeared near the edge of the moss. It blinked once, then again, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Soon, others followed, small drifting sparks moving lazily through the air, as if the lantern's glow had scattered and taken flight. The house seemed to sigh with them, each window catching the soft reflections of their light. It felt alive again, not in the way of people, but in the quiet pulse of things that remember. Aoi rested her chin on her knees, watching the fireflies move. Their rhythm was gentle, never hurried. Each flicker seemed to pause just long enough to let the silence breathe between them. Somewhere deeper in the garden, a night insect began to sing a single, trembling note that echoed faintly in the air. The wind chime answered, and for a moment the two sounds overlapped perfectly, like a conversation between unseen friends. The tea was cooling beside her. She reached for it, feeling the faint warmth of the cup against her fingertips. The lantern's light wavered with her movement, casting slow waves across the floorboards. She remembered another summer night long ago, when she had sat here as a child. Her grandmother had been beside her, cutting paper into small shapes to hang from the bamboo for tanabata. Outside, the fireflies had danced just as they did now, and the air had been filled with the smell of sweet syrup and festival smoke from the distant town. Every flame has a memory, her grandmother had told her, and every light is looking for the wind that first carried it. Aoi had not understood then. But tonight, watching the lantern flicker in the evening air. She thought she did. The flame wavered again, and for a heartbeat it seemed to bend toward the wind chime, as if answering a call. The glass bell rang softly in return, its tone clear and distant, like the voice of something that lived between light and sound. The breeze carried the scent of rain still lingering in the soil. Somewhere, a frog croaked, its voice slow and heavy with sleep. The fireflies drifted higher now, some rising toward the roof, others vanishing into the dark beyond the garden gate. Aoi's eyes followed them until the world began to blur. She felt the day's weight settle gently in her limbs, not exhaustion, but a kind of surrender. The kind that came only when the body remembered it was part of the night. The air shimmered faintly. The lantern's glow spread outward, and for a moment it seemed to touch everything: the wind chime, the persimmon tree, the pond, where the koi turned in slow circles. In that soft light, she saw movement, a figure near the far edge of the garden. It was faint, almost part of the shadow, but it glowed slightly, as though made of mist and memory. The figure stood still, watching her. Aoi did not move. Her heart did not quicken. There was no fear, only recognition, like meeting someone in a dream whom she had always known. The wind rose slightly, and the lantern's flame bent toward the figure. For an instant, the garden shimmered. The scent of lavender drifted through the air. Her grandmother's scent. Aoi closed her eyes. She felt warmth beside her, as if someone had sat down on the veranda just within reach. The chime rang again, softly, a note so pure it almost broke the silence. And then, a voice barely more than a breath. "You remembered the song." Aoi nodded, though she didn't open her eyes. "Yes. Then you understand." The voice faded, but the warmth remained. When she opened her eyes again, the figure was gone, the garden empty except for fireflies and mist. The lantern's glow trembled once, then steadied. Aoi let her gaze soften, the world melting again into light and shadow. Above her, the stars were beginning to appear. One, then another, each one faint as breath. The sound of the night insects deepened, their chorus steady, hypnotic. She leaned back, hands resting against the cool wood. The tea beside her had gone cold, but she didn't mind. The lantern flickered in rhythm with the wind chime's gentle tone, and the house exhaled. Slowly, a deep, contented sigh that filled the space between all sounds. The night felt endless. The kind of endlessness that does not stretch forward, but expands inward, a quiet infinity folded inside the heart of stillness. And within it, Aoi felt her grandmother's presence. Again, not as a ghost, but as the air itself, the warmth within the night, the rhythm that guided even the smallest flame. The lantern's glow dimmed, its paper edges curling faintly from the heat. Aoi stood, lifted it gently from the floor, and carried it down the veranda steps. She placed it at the edge of the pond. Its reflection trembled in the water, a twin flame drifting with the ripples. For a moment, the two lights, one real, one mirrored, seemed to breathe together. Then a breeze passed, and the reflection broke into pieces of gold. The wind chime rang once more, its voice clear and high. The fireflies rose in answer, their lights scattering like small souls into the dark. Aoi watched until the last of them disappeared. Then she turned back toward the house, its windows glowing faintly from within. She slid the shoji closed behind her, the paper doors whispering like soft cloth. Inside, the tatami was cool beneath her feet. The house was utterly still and yet alive, as if listening. When she lay down, the lantern's glow still lingered on her eyelids. The world outside had faded into a single sound, the distant, rhythmic ring of the wind chime, steady as breathing. And somewhere, beneath that sound, the faintest hum, the one her grandmother had taught her long ago, the song of things that never quite end. Chapter 5: The Voice Beneath the Wind. The night had become so quiet it seemed the world had forgotten how to breathe. The lantern had burned low. Its glow, once golden and full, was now a dim pulse within the darkness, a single heartbeat in a body of night. Outside, the air hung heavy with stillness. The sound of the insects had softened to a faint, steady rhythm, like a lullaby the forest was singing only for itself. Aoi stirred from her half-dream. She wasn't sure if she had slept at all, or if she had only drifted between moments of remembering and forgetting. Her body felt weightless, as though she were lying not upon the tatami, but upon a gentle current of air. The house creaked softly. The wood seemed to breathe, each sound rising and falling like a sigh. Somewhere, deep within that hush, she heard it, a whisper, barely more than the rustle of the wind through the eaves. It came again, clearer now. Aoi. Her eyes opened slowly. The room was dark, the pale outline of the shoji doors glowing faintly in the moonlight. The wind chime stirred once, its note trembling, suspended. Aoi. The voice was neither near nor far. It seemed to move through the air, shifting like the breeze, not a sound she heard with her ears, but one that brushed gently against her thoughts. She sat up, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. The air was cool against her skin, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked wood and extinguished incense. "Who's there?" she whispered, though part of her already knew. The paper doors quivered slightly. A gust of wind slid through the narrow cracks, curling around her fingers like a touch. "It's only the wind," the voice said, though there was warmth in it, warmth too human for mere air. Aoi stood and crossed the room. The floorboards were cool beneath her bare feet. She slid open the shoji just enough to see the veranda. The garden was silver with moonlight. The pond reflected the sky, the faint ripples moving like breath across its surface. The persimmon tree stood silent, its leaves glistening with dew. The wind moved again, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure standing near the far path, a shape outlined not in light, but in absence, as though the night itself had chosen to take form. "You kept the house well," the voice said softly. "It still remembers." Her heart tightened. "Grandmother?" The wind shifted. A faint shimmer passed through the branches, and the voice grew gentler still. "You listen to the quiet. That is good. So few remember how." The chime above her head rang once, its tone high and clear. The sound drifted out into the garden, where it seemed to join the whisper of leaves and water. "The wind," the voice continued, "is the breath of all that once was. Every sigh, every word left unspoken, it gathers here. That's why the house never sleeps. It waits. It listens." Aoi stepped out onto the veranda. The wood was cool and damp. She drew her shawl closer, though the chill she felt was not from the air. "Do you wait too?" she asked softly. There was no answer at first, only the rustle of the garden, the small sound of something moving beneath the moss. Then, faintly, "No, I am carried." A breeze rose, stronger now. It moved through the trees, set the chime singing, and lifted the edges of her hair. For an instant, she felt weightless again, as if she, too, might be carried away. "Where?" she asked. "Wherever memory drifts when it no longer needs a body." The words came like mist, thinning even as she heard them. Her eyes blurred with tears she hadn't meant to shed. The lantern's light flickered once, then steadied as though listening too. "I miss you," she whispered. "You never lost me," said the voice. "You only stopped listening to the wind." Aoi closed her eyes. The air seemed to hum around her, a sound not made of notes, but of presence. It filled her chest until she thought her heart might overflow. When she opened her eyes again, the garden seemed brighter. The moonlight glowed upon the pond, and the figure was gone. Only the wind remained, moving gently through the leaves, its voice softer now, almost content. She sat on the veranda again, folding her legs beneath her. The night was cool, but the stillness carried a strange comfort, as if the air itself were holding her. The chime rang once more, a tone so pure it seemed to erase the edges of thought. The sound faded slowly, and in the silence that followed, Aoi felt something shift inside her, a quiet understanding that words could not hold. The wind brushed against her cheek, a touch lighter than a sigh. It moved through her hair, across her shoulders, and into the house behind her. The paper doors rustled softly. The tatami exhaled its scent, the same smell of summer rain and old memory. She leaned forward and whispered, so softly that even the night might not hear. "Thank you." The wind answered, a faint, rising sound that might have been laughter, or might have been nothing at all. Then it passed, slipping beyond the garden, beyond the hill, into the dark woods where all sounds eventually go. The chime rang once more, a single note, slowly dissolving into silence. Aoi remained there long after it faded. The moon climbed higher, and the world stilled again. She listened, not for the voice now, but for the space it had left behind, that tender quiet where meaning lives after words have gone. The lantern had nearly burned out. She reached for it, cupping her hands around the dimming flame. Its warmth pulsed softly against her palms. The air was utterly still. Then, deep within that stillness, the wind returned, a single breath passing through the trees. It carried no words this time, only a feeling, gentle, weightless, a promise that she was not alone. Aoi smiled. She set the lantern beside her and lay down upon the veranda, her head resting on her folded arm. The moonlight brushed her face, and the night cradled her in its slow rhythm. Somewhere far above, the wind moved again, whispering through unseen branches, its voice endless, its song older than memory. And in its quiet, Aoi drifted into sleep, not away from the world, but deeper into it, where all things breathed together. Chapter 6. Before the dawn. The night was thinning. Darkness no longer felt infinite, it had begun to pale at its edges, turning to the soft gray that lives between dream and morning. Aoi stirred before she woke. Her body moved the way a leaf moves on water without thought, guided only by what the air remembers. The wooden floor beneath her was cool, the faint grain pressing against her skin. She breathed in slowly. The scent of the tatami was lighter now, less earthy, more like sunlight waiting to happen. The house, too, was different, its silence no longer deep, but expectant, like a body poised for its first breath. A faint hum reached her from the garden. It wasn't the voice from the night, nor the whisper of the wind. It was the sound of water drops falling from leaves into the pond below. Each note was delicate, perfect in its simplicity, a small reminder that time still moved, even in the stillest hours. Aoi opened her eyes. The world was silver and soft. The moon had sunk low behind the hills, its light spreading thinly across the sky. The horizon held the faintest blush, the kind of color that could vanish if one blinked too soon. She sat up slowly, her hair brushing against the fabric of her sleeve. The lantern beside her had long gone out, its wick cold, its paper edges curled like the petals of a spent flower. The wind chime stirred faintly above her head, its glass body catching the first threads of dawn. The sound was different now, not melancholy, not bright, but clean, like a single drop of dew falling into silence. The house exhaled softly. Somewhere, a board creaked. The air shifted, and for the first time, she noticed how light began to touch things not with brilliance, but with memory. The moss in the garden shimmered faintly. The pond mirrored the slow glow of the east. Each stone, each leaf, each droplet of water seemed to hold its own small piece of the coming day. Aoi rose and stepped out into the open. The ground was damp beneath her feet, the coolness of the night still clinging to the earth. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from cold, but from a quiet reverence for what the world was becoming. The air was alive now. Every breeze felt like the whisper of something awakening, not just the trees or the sky, but the space between them. She walked to the pond's edge. The koi moved slowly beneath the surface, their scales glinting faintly in the half-light. A single firefly still lingered above the water, its glow dim but stubborn, a last spark refusing to yield to morning. Aoi smiled softly. She knelt beside the pond, cupped her hands, and lifted a little water. It was cold, and when it touched her face, she felt the faint sting of reality. Returning the delicate pain of waking, the first awareness of being once more inside a world that breathes. Behind her, the house stood in silence. Yet it no longer felt empty. The stillness within it was warm, as though every shadow, every piece of wood, had been filled again with quiet life. She turned toward it and bowed her head slightly, a gesture both instinctive and ancient. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to the wind, nor to any one memory, but to the space that had held them all. A faint breeze passed, lifting the edge of her shawl. The chime answered softly, its tone clear against the silence. It was a different sound now, not calling, not mourning. Simply being. The horizon brightened. The faint blush deepened into gold, and a thin line of sunlight touched the persimmon tree. The wet leaves glistened as though each one had captured its own dawn. Mist rose from the garden path, curling like smoke before dissolving into the air. Aoi watched as the first beam of sunlight crossed the veranda. It slid gently over the wood, then touched the threshold of the house. The warmth it carried was subtle, but unmistakable, like the first word of a long-forgotten song. She stepped back inside. The tatami greeted her with its familiar scent, fresh, alive, as though the night rain had been a kind of cleansing dream. The photograph in the alcove caught the morning light. Her grandmother's smile glowed faintly in it, and for an instant, I could almost imagine her standing there, hands folded neatly, eyes soft with laughter. "I'll keep listening," she said quietly. "To the wind, to the rain, to everything." And as she spoke, she realized that the words did not echo. They didn't need to. The house had already heard. She poured herself a new cup of tea. The steam rose slowly, dancing in the sunlight. The aroma of roasted barley filled the air, earthy, calm, grounding. She took a sip, felt the warmth spread through her body. Outside, the chime rang once more, clear, delicate, a sound like the world waking up. She sat there, watching the day unfold. The sky shifted from gold to blue. The shadows moved across the veranda. And in that slow unfolding, she felt something within her settle completely. No grief, no longing, only the quiet certainty that every sound, every breeze, every passing moment was connected, that nothing truly leaves, it only changes shape. The house creaked softly again, as though agreeing. The sound of a distant bird echoed through the morning air. The village was beginning to stir, a door sliding open somewhere, the faint rattle of a bicycle bell. But here, in this small house on the hill, time moved differently. It was slower, gentler, as if the world itself wished to let her linger just a little longer between dream and day. The sunlight reached her face at last. She closed her eyes, letting its warmth sink deep into her skin. The chime's tone carried through the air once more, followed by a faint breeze that smelled of persimmon and rain. And in that moment, I felt the world breathe again, a single, endless exhale that reached from the mountains to the sea. The day had begun, but its beginning felt like a continuation of the dream, of the voice, of the quiet that still sang beneath all things. She opened her eyes, and the light filled them. Epilogue: wind chimes on a summer veranda. By midday, the world was full of light. The sky stretched endlessly above the hills, a blue so soft it seemed woven from air itself. The rain from the night before had vanished, leaving behind a brilliance that shimmered across every leaf, every stone, every ripple of water in the pond. The veranda was warm beneath Aoi's feet. The wood had drunk in the sunlight, its grain smooth and golden. She moved slowly, the way one walks through a memory that has become part of the present. The wind chime above her swayed gently. Its glass surface caught the light, casting small circles of brightness across the eaves. Each ring of sound was clear, soft, unhurried, as if the world itself had chosen to speak through it. Aoi smiled. She had opened every door of the house that morning, letting the air move freely from room to room. The scent of tatami mingled with that of green tea and sunlight. Curtains fluttered like soft breaths. Even the shadows seemed alive, stretching and curling with the wind. In the garden, the moss had dried to a bright, tender green. The persimmon tree shimmered in the heat, its leaves whispering faintly. Dragonflies moved lazily across the pond, their wings flashing silver in the light. It was the kind of day when time seemed to pause, when hours folded into one another, and every sound became part of the same endless rhythm. Aoi sat down on the veranda with a fresh cup of tea. The cup was cool against her hands, the condensation beading and dripping slowly down her fingers. She lifted it, watched the steam twist upward into the sunlight, then disappear. The world was utterly still, and yet full, as if silence itself had texture, a weight that rested gently against her skin. The chime rang again. It was a small sound, but it seemed to reach far beyond the garden, beyond the hills, perhaps even beyond the world she knew. She closed her eyes. The sound carried her inward, to the house's quiet heartbeat, to the places within her that the voice of the wind had once touched. She could still hear her grandmother there, not as words, but as a presence. A steady calm, a patience warm, a love that had long since learned to exist without form. A cicada began its song from somewhere in the trees. Its call rose and fell like a wave of heat. Other voices joined it, a layered hum that filled the air with summer's deep rhythm. The sound was vast, but it didn't break the peace. It became part of it. The chime responded, its tone weaving through the chorus like a single thread of light. Aoi leaned back, resting her hands on the veranda's edge. The sun's warmth seeped into her palms. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, slow and even. A memory drifted through her mind, the same veranda, years ago, when she had sat in her grandmother's lap as the wind chime rang above them. She had asked what it was for. "It tells the wind where we are," her grandmother had said. "So it never forgets to visit." Aoi had laughed then, a small, bright sound. Now she found herself smiling at the memory. The wind passed again, gentle and warm, as though it had heard. She set her tea aside and lay down on the veranda. The wood was hot beneath her back, but it felt grounding, real. Above her, the sky rippled faintly in the heat. A swallow flew past, its shadow cutting across her face for an instant before vanishing into the light. The sound of the chime faded into the distance, then returned, each tone softer, rounder, as if it were echoing through time itself. Always breathing slowed. Her eyes closed once more. The hum of the cicadas deepened into something almost oceanic, a sound so constant it ceased to be sound at all, becoming instead the rhythm of being. She felt herself drifting not into sleep, but into a state that was quieter than thought, lighter than air. The scent of tatami rose faintly through the open door behind her. It mingled with the heat, with the faint sweetness of persimmon, with the whisper of distant water. Somewhere, the wind moved again, not strong, but steady, carrying with it the echo of her grandmother's hum. A low, wordless tune, woven into the sound of the leaves. It passed through the chime, set it ringing once, twice, and then fell away. The world shimmered in its wake. The garden, the sky, the veranda all seemed to pulse gently, as though remembering what it meant to be alive. Aoi breathed in deeply. She could feel the air filling her chest, the slow movement of her heart beneath her hand. And for a moment, a brief, infinite moment, she felt herself dissolve into the same rhythm as the wind. The sound of the chime faded. The cicadas sang on. The world turned softly toward afternoon. When she opened her eyes again, the light had shifted. Shadows stretched long across the veranda, the color of amber and tea. A single petal from the plum tree had drifted down from somewhere, perhaps from a memory, perhaps from the wind's own keeping. It landed on her chest. She held it gently, its texture fragile, its scent faint but real. The chime rang one last time. The note lingered, hung in the air, and slowly dissolved into quiet. Aoi smiled again, not because of what she heard, but because of what she didn't. The stillness that followed was complete, and within it, everything remained.